I've always worked in the arts, and this is something that I struggle with a little bit in the book a little bit, but it's actually something that's bigger in my off the living proof page life is I've always like hidden my creativity behind my job, and I've like helped hundreds of artists like implement these projects and programs. And I always think that all these artists believed in themselves more than I believed in me. And so I think that what going through genetic testing has really done for me is say, you are a creative person and you do have these creative ambitions, and it's okay to do both. You don't have to sort of live in service to other people's creative goals. And so I feel like those are the types of things that have been really, um, kind of life-changing for me in the sense of having this book come out.
This is Story to Count with Jen Jumba. In conversations with writers, something magical happens. And as readers, we begin to see them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. My hope is through these conversations, you learn about their crafts and them as a person. You'll become like me, fiercely loyal, want to read their current book, entire backlist, any future book, or any book they blurb. And when you see their name, you'll want to support them, not only as the incredible storytellers, but also the thoughtful individuals you have come to know. My guest today is Tiffany Graham Charkosky, and she writes about motherhood, medicine, and health. Her creative work explores the dynamics at work within human relationships and has been featured in outlets such as Oprah Daily, Literary Hub, Electric Literature, The Educated Patient, Gordon Square Review. Her essay, Year of the Rat, was the Ohio Prose Contest winner in 2022. She is a frequent guest on podcasts, most notably sharing advice on writing memoir and exploring the hope and impact inherent in genetic testing. Tiffany lives with her husband, 2 sons, and dog in Northeast Ohio. She spends her early mornings writing and weekends cheering for her sons on various sports fields across Ohio. She has over 20 years of experience working in the arts. She's currently my colleague and is serving as the Director of Arts and Culture at Cleveland Public Library. And first of all, congratulations on your memoir, Living Proof: How Love Defied Genetic Legacy. So excited
Thanks.
to have you here to talk about this book.
Thank you so much, Jen. I'm so honored to be a guest on your show today.
You've been writing for years, and this is your first published memoir. And it really has an interesting story and an interesting background. So can you talk a little bit about where that idea of this is a story I want to share with everybody came from?
I would love to talk about that. I think a lot of times when people are writers, you're sort of always living in the world thinking about collecting images and stories and things that you might someday use to write about. And at the same time, I'm a huge reader and I use books for pretty much everything in my life. I'm kind of constantly looking for other people's stories to sort of validate my own life existence. And when I went through the process of genetic testing about 14 years ago, I kept looking for a book written by somebody who had been there, done that, gone through it, lived to tell, and would sort of offer me the hope and solace that I think we look for in stories. And that book didn't exist at the time that I was going through genetic testing. And so being the writer that I am and the curious person that I am, I sort of felt like maybe there was a story that I could tell here. However, I also think that when you're writing memoir, you need a little bit of distance from the immediate sort of events that you're writing your story about. And over a couple of years, and as my journey through the genetic testing world and kind of preventative medical care life that I am living, I was able to realize that I had a unique perspective that I could offer. And it just sort of kept drawing me back to the page and trying to figure out what that story looked like, how I might tell it in a way that could connect with readers. And so it was a many years long process between thinking maybe I have a story worth sharing and building the craft side of the writing enough to feel like it was a story that I could actually put in a book and try to encourage other people to check out.
Tiffany, you touched on something earlier about us as readers and as a librarian trying to match readers with just the right book. And so there's a saying, write the book you want to read. But as a librarian, when I'm standing and somebody's asking for a book recommendation, we read for lots of reasons. We read because we want to learn about something. We read because we need to escape something. Oftentimes, and you touched on it earlier, we say we read so that we don't feel alone, to feel some sense of solace, I believe is what you said, and that somebody else has experienced something similar. There's hope. There's that sense of community that you find in a book. And I think it's incredibly brave and vulnerable of you to share a memoir. I mean, we all have stories, that live inside of us, but taking that leap to say, I'm going to share this story with everybody. I can tell you, I'm sure you have touched many, many people who've read this book who feel like, okay, she gets me. I've done this. I've experienced this, and how helpful that is. So can you talk a little bit about that? I almost think there's like a before and an after moment. We talk about before COVID, after COVID, but there's the before the phone call from your dad, and then there's the after. Can you talk a little bit about that phone call, which is kind of in the opening scenes of this book?
Sure. Yeah, definitely not giving anything away because it happens at the very beginning of the book. So my mother passed away when I was 11 years old. She had a horrific battle with colon cancer. And I think for anybody who's lost a parent at any stage of your life, it's terrible. And for people who, in my experience, losing that parent as a child, it's sort of like the defining piece of your childhood and the rest of your life. And so I spent years and years sort of trying to prove to myself and to my entire family that I was good. I'd survived this. I wasn't broken by this loss, and that I think I did a lot of, focused a lot of my energy in like academic achievements and trying to kind of prove to myself and the people in my life that like I was good. I'd made it, if you will. And so I was in my late 20s, and I was married to my husband, Brian, who I'm still married to. We had a 2-year-old son at the time. And I felt like when the phone rang and I got this news from my dad where he said, your uncle had some testing before he passed away. He also had colon cancer and tipped off a team of geneticists, fortunately, who encouraged him to pursue testing. And my response was, well, you're calling me. Of course you have whatever you're telling me, I need to know, going back to being like a reader and an information collecting kind of person. But what that information meant for me was that the story I had told myself about myself was no longer true. I hadn't survived the hardest thing. I had a new hard thing in my future that I didn't know if I was strong enough to go through, and how that new information and new future would change my family. It really highlighted a lot of unaddressed trauma, from my childhood. I think everybody from the outside probably looked at me and thought, oh, she's doing great. Like she went to this great college and she did really well in high school and she has this job that she loves and this husband that she loves, and she has this beautiful child. And I had all of these things, and it felt like I'd worked really hard to like build this life that I wanted. And then it felt to me like it could all be sort of like blown away in a storm or something, like it was a sandcastle that could just wash away. So there was the before and the after was you're good, you've made it, and now you just have to hold on to what you have. And then it became, well, now I have to figure out sort of how to not put my family through the exact same experience that I had gone through as a child.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain power with having knowledge, right? And oftentimes we make decisions based on the information we have at the time. And hindsight is always going to be 2020 when you look back. But I can't imagine that phone call. And I think about the gazillions of emotions that had to have been going through you. And they're not like the customer service calls where they're dealt with in the order in which they're received. I mean, they're kind of bouncing all over the place.
Yeah.
And what a tough thing. And meanwhile, it's like in the middle of dinner, right? So then you have to go
Yeah.
back and you've got Ben who's, 2 and, has to finish his dinner, and you've got to give him a tub and read bedtime stories and put him to bed, and then try to sit with this and figure out, okay, what next?
Yes. So that was huge. And I think, the jumble of feelings was also, I have two siblings. I knew that my dad was going to be calling them. I'm the oldest sibling. So my dad called me first. And I think my dad was really wrestling with this information. What do I do with this? And how do I, help my kids go through this? And he'd, of course, lost, his wife and had to raise us on his own. He was in his 30s when my mom passed away. So he was a young man with three children. And so I'm thinking about him. I'm thinking about my son. I'm thinking about my husband. I'm thinking about myself and my fear that was I already, growing cancer. I was the age that my mom was when she was very sick when I received that phone call. So this feeling that I was like a ticking time bomb, I think is what was really set off in me. And then about a week after that phone call, I discovered that I was also pregnant with my second child. And so there was kind of the pregnancy hormones, but there's also, with the type of genetic mutation that I have, there's a lot of questions around when are you done having children? There's a very high risk of uterine cancer. And so this sort of whole, domino effect of like, will we have more children? Won't we have more children? And then this overwhelming sense of gratitude that I was already pregnant and didn't actually need to make that decision.
Right.
I think it was a huge roller coaster of emotions. And will I get tested? And if I get tested, what do I need to have in place in order for that to happen? And how do I talk about this with the rest of my family? And, there was just sort of the whole, it was like a Pandora's box of it had been opened and just sort of a cascade of things to come afterwards.
Right. And I think about the fact, I'm still sorry that you lost your mom.
Thank
She
you.
sounds like she was an amazing person. And at the age of 11, that coming of age, just absolutely critical. But you talked a little bit about being focused on achievement, getting good grades, getting into good college, getting your master's degree, all of those things, and still not feeling like that you had, or still feeling like you had to prove something. I think you proved it because you were living an authentic life. And whether or not you realized it, maybe it was the fact that you had an opportunity to do things that your mom sadly did not, and honoring her in each of those decisions to live your best life and meet this fabulous guy and have two fabulous boys with him and a meaningful career. Art has always been part of your life, which is really kind of neat.
Yeah.
And seeing that expressed through words on a page and through the work that you're doing now and have done. But I'm agog when you mentioned in the book that it's the MSH6 gene. And I didn't realize this, but as human beings, we have 20,000 sets of genes. And I'm thinking there's one, like 19,990 can't be like, dude, get out, right? Or overcome that. So I'm amazed. And just like medicine, the more we know and the more we study, the more we learn, and having to feel unsettled, not knowing what's coming. None of us in this life know what's coming, but to know that your risk is dramatically increased has to be a bit of a challenge. And yet you focused so positively on, your family and these boys and your siblings and that bond you have with them. They sound amazing.
Yeah, they are amazing. So yes, so I have a mutation on one of my cancer suppressor genes. And for anybody interested in kind of diving deeper into the genetic rabbit hole, I kind of describe it as like BRCA, but affecting your colon and more like gastrointestinal tract. And if you're a woman, your uterus and your ovaries. So they're in the same kind of family. They're in the same kind of family of hereditary cancer genes. And it basically means that, your body, all of our bodies our cells are reproducing all the time. Sometimes a cell will go rogue and most people's bodies kind of fix it. They overwrite it and the operating system continues working. It basically means that in people who have one of the hereditary cancer genes, that particular gene is not fixing the problem that the system is making. So it just keeps reproducing bad copies of itself. So I find it helpful to talk about it in those kinds of terms because it depersonalizes what the information means to me. It takes it from you are broken and you have always been broken to there's a part in my body that isn't working the way that it's supposed to. And I feel like for a lot of people who have, medical problems, I think especially women, we feel a sense of shame when our body doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Whether breastfeeding is hard for you or getting pregnant is hard for you, or you have an abnormal pap smear or whatever it looks like. I think all of those things are these it makes you feel like I did something wrong. There is something wrong
Yes.
with me. I am broken. And I think we write these stories as women about our bodies and we want them to be. We try to control them with food, with exercise, with birth control, with,
Makeup,
yes,
clothing.
all these things. Yes,
We're a little bit
exactly.
vain.
Yes. And so when something that the whole world is telling us, like the body that you're in is so valuable or your value feels connected to your physical appearance or your body, when your body is the thing that's kind of turning against you, I think it's so hard to trust your body again. And I feel like the more we can just talk about these things as humans and as women, the more we can like remove some of the shame that we feel when our body isn't doing what it's supposed to do.
I think we're now in an age where my mom and certainly my grandma never talked about perimenopause or menopause. And there has been this resurgence lately in the last few years of us talking about the things that are happening to our body and trying to understand them. Now, most of us know that this is like a temporary thing, the hot flashes or the brain fog or the night sweats or any of those types of things. For you, who's living with the rogue gene that is not behaving properly,
Mhm.
how is it that, you have a cold or, you have a cramp and your brain doesn't go, oh my gosh, this is the really bad rogue gene versus, this is just, you know, a cramp because I ran or because I ate something that didn't agree with me or this is just a cold. And how does your brain separate those things or can't it?
Sometimes it does it better than others. So there's a couple scenes I talk about in the book where like I had a optical migraine, which is a migraine where your vision like looks like a piece of kaleidoscope or
Mm-hmm.
like a broken mirror. And I basically thought I was dying. I was like, I have a brain tumor. This is it. I'm done for. My husband took me to the emergency room. We paid $500 for me to go to the emergency room. And in the 30 to 45 minutes it took for them to see me, my vision had come back. I explained what had happened and they were like, did you Google ocular migraine? And I was like, no, I couldn't read anything. And they were like, oh, you just had like the most textbook example of this very common thing. They're like, go home. Your headache will be coming in about an hour. Go to sleep. And I mean, so I escalated like immediately to I'm dying. I also, there was a point, this is actually not in the book, but one winter I was like shoveling snow and I was so sore from it that I like ended up going to get an ultrasound 100% certain that like my kidneys were like, I was dying of renal failure or something. And they took an ultrasound and they're like, there's nothing, you're fine. And I was like, this is so scary. A couple of days later, it goes away. A month later, it snows again. I shovel all the snow. I get the same feeling. And I'm like, oh, that was the feeling of shoveling snow. So I think that a lot of times for me, when it's like something that I haven't experienced before I like immediately go to like worst case scenario. Once it's something I've like had happen a couple of times, I can say, oh, this is like a regular thing that is not cancer. Luckily, the common cold is usually not a sign of cancer. So that kind of thing doesn't freak me out. But, if there was anything kind of muscular, skeletal, like it definitely takes me a little time. And I do certainly like, I think have really good relationships with my medical providers, trying to kind of manage that, not wanting to be a hypochondriac, but also not wanting to like turn a blind eye to something that should have been caught early.
Right. I think that's the duality that you're capturing, is that knowing your body well enough to know
Mhm.
when something is amiss, and having to be an advocate to make sure, so that we always hear, like, when you catch things early, the outcomes are better. So
Mhm.
making sure that you go and you get that test or that reassurance documentation that things are okay. And at the same time, not turning that blind eye and saying, oh, it's probably just, I pulled a muscle while I was shoveling snow type of
Mhm.
thing. And living with that, I have to imagine, is a bit challenging. And then I'm thinking about the fact that on top of all of this, you're pregnant.
Yes.
And I have to say, for those listening, I think my favorite scene in the book is that you're sick. I mean, you're nauseous, you're puking. A lot of times happens when people are pregnant. And you're in the bathroom, and underneath the door come these little, like, Matchbox race cars. And then Ben, who's, 2, says, "Mom, I have no idea how they got in here, and I'm just gonna sit here with you so nobody else comes in." And I just think it's one of those great scenes that humanizes everything, that what you do with this memoir is not only introduce us to your journey of being somebody who's diagnosed with having this gene, but also pregnant and raising a family. You've humanized it. So it's not this textbook clinical, that this happened and then I had this test and then I had this test. I mean, you're capturing those moments of motherhood, which, even if you were just sick because you ate something funny, that scene is just so poignant and tender, you know?
Thank
So
you. Thank you. I feel like one of the things that I struggled with in writing this memoir was this feeling that I didn't have a medical background. I didn't have a genetic testing background. And I think sometimes it can feel like if you're writing about your own medical experience as just a regular person, that you don't have the credentials to do that. And so one of the things that I really worked on and wrestled with myself, and frankly pep talked myself, was saying most people who have a medical thing happen to them are not medical professionals. And
agreed.
so this is a medical memoir, but it's not jargony. It's not about the medical. It's not attempting to be like a roadmap for how you do this. It's not like a clinical guidebook. It's really an exploration of what this kind of medical information kind of does in your brain and your heart, and in the relationships of the people who are going through it with you. And I hope that that's something that like resonates, whether you have a genetic problem or not, but just going kind of through a medical thing, period. So for me to tell myself, actually not being a medical professional actually makes you uniquely qualified to tell this story, because I will tell it in a way that I could make this medical information understandable to me. And I hope that that translates to the readers as well.
Absolutely, it did. I think you can, for lack of a better term, substitute the gene with any other illness that somebody experiences, and knows that, because when you're sick with something, all you hear is that medical jargon from your medical team, and trust your medical team. But then there's the whole part of you that is human and absolutely uniquely qualified to talk about that from that perspective. That's what resonates with people. The facts and the figures are great, but what people retain is the story that's around those facts and figures. So now I know I have 20,000 genes and hope they're all behaving at this moment. But at the same time, I understand, and I think, we've talked a little bit before about this, is, how well you handle it, and whether it's a compartmentalization, almost, you talked before about, and everybody thought you were fine, masking and like doing really well in athletics and doing really well in art and doing really well at school and family and all those things, but like underneath. And I think that's all of us have something underneath what we present to the world. And so being able to connect with somebody who's putting that into words is such a gift.
Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot to hear. And you met me about a year after I had had my oophorectomy, which is the medical term for had my ovaries removed, which is surgical menopause. So you met me kind of a year after I'd finished the preventative surgery stage of this journey, which was a 10-year process. So I feel like one of the things that I love about memoir in general is I love the way that it constantly reminds me that every single person I'm interacting with has those private things that we don't know about, and really tries to it makes me want to give everybody like the dignity and the respect of like assuming that they're all trying their best. And I think it's made me pretty good at like not taking a throwaway kind of snarky comment, super personal, in a lot of situations. So I can usually do a pretty good job of reminding myself that everybody is battling something, and we all have to kind of operate in this world at a professional level or in a social level without dumping the burden of our experiences on people at every turn, but sort of this understanding that there's sort of the public you that's out in the world and then the private self, but we're all living as like the amalgamation of these two. And so it helps me to remember that I've gone through something, and so has everybody else that I'm interacting with every day.
I think you mentioned something that I think is so important about giving people the dignity and the respect to know, even if they don't say what's going on, just to kind of give people that little bit of grace. And I think it's a valuable lesson. I think that's why we get along, is that sense of compassion that offer, that sense of understanding, and such an important thing. And since this book came out in the fall, what has been the response? Have you heard from readers who are like, oh my goodness, thank you so much for writing that? Or found a different sense of community with people who are struggling with, do I get the test? Do I not get the test? I mean, you also have 2 siblings, right? And that they had to make that decision independent of the one you made.
Yes. So writing the book has been, one hand, it's been like a life-changing experience to have the story out in the world. On the other hand, my daily life looks pretty much the same as it did before the book came out. I'm still waking up early to write. I'm still at the same job. I still, am chasing after my children and driving them around to various things. But the flip side to all of that is that I have made so many connections with readers that are it's why you write a book. Like, I've gotten messages from people on the opposite side of the country saying, thank you for writing this story. You put into words feelings that I have been carrying for years. You make me feel seen. And that is so validating. And when I wrote the book, my author's note at the beginning, I say that I felt so alone in my journey and that I hoped that this book would help other people feel less alone in this process. And either as like the patient themselves, or if you're, a friend or a loved one of somebody who's going through this, to help them kind of understand it. So that type of feedback has been incredible. The other piece is that in the years since I went through genetic testing, there has been so much of a community built around people who are living with these hereditary cancer risks. So I've been on like a couple podcasts with other women who are called previvors, which is what I am. A previvor is somebody who has a hereditary disposition to an illness, but is undergoing screenings and so on to help them not become a survivor of that
Yeah, I was going to
illness.
ask you about that term. Yeah. So
Yes.
thank you.
So I have made these incredible connections with other previvors, and whether they are living with risk of something neurological or something related to cancer, this feeling that like I have found this new group of my people that I didn't know I wasn't part of before has been so gratifying. And so there's like a shorthand, like you just sort of instantly know somebody when you've gone through these similar experiences. And the thing that has been really wonderful for me in making those connections is how many of those people are similar to me in that the information didn't just change their health output, health outlook on life. It fundamentally changes like who you are and how you live your life. Like, so many of them are now trying to be like advocates for these hereditary illnesses, or like are undergoing like career paths where they're like shifting what they'd been doing. There's a number of people who've like started podcasts or written books. And so for me, I've always worked in the arts. And this is something that I struggle with a little bit in the book a little bit, but it's actually something that's bigger in my off the living proof page life is I've always like hidden my creativity behind my job. And I've like helped hundreds of artists like implement these projects and programs. And I always think that all these artists believed in themselves more than I believed in me. And so I think that what going through genetic testing has really done for me is say you are a creative person and you do have these creative ambitions and it's okay to do both. You don't have to sort of live in service to other people's creative goals, but you can pursue your own. And so I feel like those are the types of things that have been really kind of life-changing for me in the sense of having this book come out is this validation in a way that all the hours and hours and hours, tens of thousands of hours probably that I spent, writing, whether it's this book or short stories or other essays, but that, there's an audience for those things and wanting to kind of keep doing it, like not just be done with this one book, but like it's unlocked that I have all these other stories that I want to make sure I'm telling too. And so that's been really, I think one of the big takeaways for me is like, it forces you to like any health crisis, I think makes you take an assessment of your life and say, am I living the life that I want to be living? Am I treating people the way I want to be treated? And they want to be treated like, am I the person I want to be? And I think that I feel in sort of going through genetic testing and kind of investing in my own creative pursuits, it makes me feel like, yes, I am getting closer and closer to being the very best version of myself who I want to be.
I'd say you're an absolutely amazing person
Thank you.
and truly best self. But I would imagine it provides that sense of clarity as well as a sense of urgency that, all of us, whoever we are, have one life. And
Mm-hmm.
I know I've switched careers, not because of a health crisis, but just because I got to the point where I was like, hey, this isn't what I enjoy doing. And this is what I do enjoy and finding a way through that. But having that also, I think, is an important part. The other thing that I was struck by in your book and your memoir is just how multifaceted it is. So it's not just, and you alluded to this earlier, it's not just happening to you, but it's happening to your family, to your siblings, to your father, to your husband, and, one son and soon to be son, and trying to balance all of that. How did you do that? I mean, I know you talk in the book about Brian just watching things when there was a moment you were in the hospital and he stayed awake, just watching the monitor to make sure everything was okay and that sense of vigilance. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about, the impact it has?
Yeah. I mean, my goodness. So I was the first one in my family to meet with the geneticist and a genetic counselor to pursue this testing. And with that came this desire to kind of demystify that process for the rest of my family. And even while I was going through the testing and while it was so scary to think about what the outcome could be, I did feel like it would be worth it. It was worth the fear to face this head on. Like putting my head in the sand was not an option that I was willing to pursue. It felt too risky. So I was in my late 20s. I'd been married a couple of years at this point. My brother is 2 years younger than me and my sister is 5 years younger than me. So we were in these like really different places in our life journeys. I was married. My brother was brand newly married when we got the call from my dad. My sister was like dating her now husband, but she didn't know that at the time, So when you're looking at these kinds of information, you have to think about like, what does this mean for me now? How does this impact my relationship? We all have to sort of navigate these things. And so I definitely feel like my brother and sister and I each took our own path to testing. We all did end up pursuing genetic testing, but kind of on our own time frames and in ways that are really authentic to who each of us are as individuals. Like I was like, I need to tell people and I need to like make sure they know what's going on. And my brother is like a lot more private. He just kind of like went and did his thing and told us when it was over. And my sister needed like a little bit more time to process and kind of think about what it meant within the context of her own relationship. My grandmother ended up testing just to see if she had passed it on. I think she needed to know, was this me or not? And it was not my grandmother. It was my grandfather who had passed away actually 1 year before my mom died. And my mom was one of 4 children. And as far as I know, one of her 2 siblings who are still alive have tested. The one who has tested is negative, and the other one, I'm hoping is negative because he hasn't been tested. Everybody just kind of makes, or hasn't been tested as far as I know. So I feel like everybody makes these decisions based on the amount of information that they can handle and what they can do for themselves. The other thing I think about any kind of illness, especially these hereditary illnesses, is that my family, by the time my uncle died, my grandma had lost her husband. 1 year later, she lost my mom. My mom was 30. She's the second oldest, which meant 2 of her siblings lost their sister in their 20s. They lost their second brother in their late 30s and early 40s. My grandma lost two children and a husband, and then was kind of looking at like, well, what about my grandchildren? And so I feel like there's just these layers of grief that families work through. And I think part of what I was fearful of with my family was that, were we like strong enough as a family to handle this information? And what if somebody else became sick? And it just, for me, I felt like I needed to kind of protect my core family, the family I was building and, raising, but also this like extended family who I just watched go through so much. And don't go into that as deeply in Living Proof, because that's not my story. That's not, their experiences are not my experiences. And so I think the other thing when you're writing memoir is you have to think a lot about like, what information do I have the right to be sharing and whose stories am I sharing? And I made a choice to only share medical information about my siblings when it had something important to do with my response to it, not just sort of gratuitously sharing all of this information, but that it was like triggering certain responses, mostly emotional responses, in how I was kind of processing what this looked like for all of us.
Yeah, I hate to say characters in a book, but these are family members. But there's family members who who I truly enjoy, and one of them is your Uncle Eddie. Will you talk a little bit about him? I mean, you spent like a couple weeks in the summer in Charlottesville with him, and what that was like, and some good memories of him.
Yeah, so my dad is one of 7 children. He's the middle of 7. And my mom is one of 4. And my godparents were both of their youngest siblings. So my aunt on my mom's side and my uncle on my dad's side, they were 16 when I was born. So they were just like these like young, fun aunts and uncles. Like we didn't even call them like aunt and uncle. Like we just called them by their first names because they felt closer than like an aunt or an uncle in some other circumstances. So my Uncle Eddie and my Aunt Andrea, I was like the flower girl in their wedding. They had a baby. They had a baby the spring before my mom passed away. They got married a couple of years earlier. They had a baby, and then they moved away for my uncle's job. So they had lived in Cleveland, then they moved away. And at some point, my family like decided that I should go away for a couple weeks the summer before my mom passed away and like help them with the baby. And I don't know if it was like really like we need to help. They really needed help with the baby, or if it was just like, let's switch things up. I don't know where it came from, but I went to Charlottesville, Virginia with them for 2 weeks. I played with my cousin, hung out with my uncle who, he was like the quarterback of the high school football team. The high school that my son goes to now, my uncle was like the quarterback of in the 80s. And then he was the quarterback of his football team. And he was just this like fun, like lively guy. He worked a lot though. Like he had the kind of job where like he moved all over the country for a number of years for his job. So I spent a lot of time with his wife, my aunt. But when we were together, we would like listen to music, and I always wanted him to like think that I was cool. And so there's this scene in the book where we're listening to Pearl Jam And I had like just finished fifth grade. I was heading into sixth grade. And this was when like Pearl Jam's first album had come out like the previous year. So I knew a couple of the radio songs, but my uncle like bought the cassette tape and he's like, you're going to love them, and pretended to like know the music better than I did. And it's just this like really fun, like escape hatch, I think, from like the life that I was in, which was watching my mom get kind of progressively more and more ill. And so I went away for 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, they like drove me back up to Cleveland and kind of re-entered um, my real life at that point. But I think it, for me, really showed the way that like different family members sort of provided different like outlets and support over the years. So yeah, so it was just this, weird little getaway. And I wish I could say that like we still have that closeness now, but like, life and time has like changed, and it's not like that anymore. And I miss it, and I wish it still was.
Yeah, I just think it also may have like just given you a sense of self. I think because your mom was sick when you were such a young age, it was such a kind of defined you, that you had the sick mom who, was so sick she wasn't able to walk when you would go to the rib burn off, right? Or watching out for your siblings, being the oldest, that sense of responsibility to make sure they're okay, make sure that your dad is okay. And just to go away for a couple weeks and just be you, just be Tiffany, and,
Mm-hmm.
listening to Pearl Jam, and, hanging out with a new squishable cousin. It was a bit of a gift to kind of restore that sense of self, because what you came back to just didn't have the happy ending that we all want for you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think that that was partly why, like, the Virginia scenes were ones that, they were part of the book from like the very, very beginning of it. Like, they did not come later. They were kind of core to it because it seemed like in the midst of having a sick mother, like, you still are a kid who wants to like have fun and like hang out with your friends and be yourself. So for me, it felt like kind of pairing that, like showing that kind of the multiple versions of childhood felt really important. And also that I was just a kid too. I
Yeah,
went
I can't
horseback
imagine.
riding. And so,
Right,
yeah,
I can't
just,
imagine
had some
handling
fun.
that now as an adult, let alone being, you were 11 when she passed away, but she got sick before that. So just being that young, I mean, I can't imagine. And you kind of rationalizing, and I read a ton, and I'm always struck by beautiful passages and beautiful language in the book. And so there are a couple that you wrote that I just want to highlight. When you're talking about after getting the results of your genetic testing, and you think about it in relation to your core family, to your husband, and to Ben, Mr. Matchbox Car under the door. You write a line that says, "Would I become a whisper inside my son, a screaming void, a shadow figure visiting his dreams, a voice he forgets, an extinction in his ecosystem?" Beautifully capturing something that is so hard, sad, tragic. These are these little phrases that I write down, I keep in a book, but sometimes just want to write down on a piece of paper and tuck it in my pocket and then pull it out and read it like all over again. And for everybody listening, when you read this book, there are several of these moments that will hit you. You can't see this as a podcast, but right here, it'll knock you for a loop. The beautiful expressions in something that you could be incredibly sad about, incredibly angry about, but you're choosing, while those emotions I'm sure are still there, you're choosing hope, and you're choosing to live in the moment and show up and be there for your boys. So
Thank you. Thank you.
it just, there's so many phrases. I have like a whole page here, but I just think even grief seemed to exist on a loop, circling back to remind me of how little time had passed. And you alluded to that earlier in our discussion, just the layers of grief, the grief of, did I pass this on from your grandmother's perspective to lose a husband and two children, and then wondering what the continuation of the family does to grandkids and great grandkids.
Yeah, I think for me, I am like you, I am a huge reader, and I love books that are beautifully written. I love getting lost inside like turns of phrase that like I'm like, oh, I can't believe I never thought of it that way, or that's the most perfect way to describe this. And so I think when it came time to be writing this story, it felt really important to me that I tried to take the hardest thing I'd ever gone through, but make it as beautifully told as I possibly could. And so it was really like every sentence for me was something that felt like I needed to make sure I was saying it just the way that I wanted to. And that was actually one of the most amazing gifts of being able to work with a publisher and work with like a professional editor who was able to help me make these passages sound even more like what I had hoped that they would sound like. And I always tell, my friends who are working on writing or whatever is that it's a real gift to work with any editor who really understands what you're trying to do and is making sure that you're, crystallizing this language in a way that feels exactly like how you wish it had sounded in the first place. And I think that it's something you can only do, through the act of like dozens and dozens of rewrites of something.
Yeah, and that's the advice I think I typically hear writers say to people who are currently writing or aspiring is that you write every day. It's no different than saying, "Oh, I'm going to run a marathon." You don't just show up the day of the marathon and start running. I mean, you are starting doing it something consistently and showing up every day. And some days, you feel great and other days not so much. So your process in the morning, are you one of those 5 a.m. writing people? Like you're writing before the sun gets up?
Okay, fine, 5:30.
Okay. Sleeps in, slacker.
And yes, I am because I do my best work in the morning. I've always been somebody who, if my brain needs to do something hard, it needs to come in the early part of the day. And I have two sons and I have a full-time job. And I feel like I wake up my alarm goes off at 5:35. I'm downstairs, by like 5:50, and got my coffee going, and I write until about 7. I write until the rest of the house starts to wake up and we have to like get ready for school and work and everything else. So that's the time that works best for me. I think there's a lot of writers whose work I love who don't write every day. They have different processes than I have. But for me, I have found that it's kind of amazing what an hour to an hour and a half of consistent effort, 5 to 7 days a week can bring to you. So yes, I do write early and I do better in the rest of my life when I've done it. Well, I'm more creative at work. I'm more patient with my kids. I feel like when the writing is going well, everything else in my life feels like it's going a little bit better too. And I no longer have this feeling that I've like pushed pause or put away creative Tiffany in service of other people. I feel like I'm giving myself that space to, just play with words. It's fun. And like, I think a lot of writers talk about how hard writing is, and writing is hard, but writing is also fun. And like that hour flies by for me every day. It's like a total kind of flow state thing. And even for me, I like editing a lot better than I like generating new things. So the generative stage is always the hardest. And I'll be like 300 words a day is a really productive writing day for me of new words. I know a lot of writers who are like 1,000 words, 2,000 words. That's not how it goes for me. But when you think of a book being, my book is 5,000 words. Think of that being written in 300 words a day, like how long that takes to do, that's
Right.
that's what it is though. And so to me, the consistency is important. And that also makes it, when it's time to write shorter pieces. I wrote a ton of companion essays to kind of go out when Living Proof was launched. It meant all the rest of those muscles were like fired up and ready to go. It meant like when I had these other things to be writing, I can kind of just sit down and treat it like a creative job. Just I'm going to get this thing done. And it's really wonderful. I love doing it. And it's the same way I write when I have to write at work. I set a timer, tell myself you're writing this grant proposal today, or you're writing this project description. And it's just, I think muscles that you're using all the time are kind of happy when you use them.
Agreed.
They're there for you and they're ready to work the more consistently you put them to work. And I think that's true of running or exercise or creative work too.
Yeah. No, I row. And I row in the mornings myself because I have a an erg, a rowing machine. But to your point, the days that I get up when it's still quiet and it's still kind of dark outside and I row, my days are so much better. I am much more patient. The ideas are better, all of those kinds of things. So what's your advice for writers to discern what their process looks like, since every writer is kind of different, some morning, some evening? How do you discern do you like smorgasbord it and you're like, okay, one day I'm going to write in the morning, one day I'm going to write at night, one day I'm going to write in the car while I'm waiting for my sons at school? Like, how
I
does that?
think for my advice would be to try what feels right to you and be really gentle with yourself. So I think that's something for a lot of writers who are maybe getting back to writing or feel like I think a lot of writers struggle with feeling like I'm somebody who used to write. And so you spend a lot of time like fighting with yourself about like, I'm not showing up to the page. I'm bad at this. I shouldn't be doing this. For me, when I like really started seriously getting into having a writing habit, it was about 6 years ago. It was actually during COVID. It was like, Tiffany, you've been working on this stuff. And if you're not able to find the time to find a consistent writing thing during a time when the entire world is shut down, then this isn't a thing that you're serious about. Like that was the sort of pep talk I had to say to myself.
Wow, do not give me a pep talk.
That was what I did. But I said that to myself. And then I was so scared of showing up and what I might say. And it's scary to see how bad first drafts are, how messy first drafts are. So I would sit downstairs. I had my coffee. I lit a candle and I said, okay, you are just here. You're having fun. It was like my writing self and like this creative self needed to become friends again and had to trust each other again. So slow going. And so I think what I would say to any writer is just like be kind to yourself. Couple it with something that you enjoy. Like I have a friend who likes to go write at a bar. She will like go to a bar, get a glass of wine and sit and write. And so it's
Oh my
like,
gosh, I'm the kind of reader that likes to go to a bar and get a glass of wine and read a book.
Yes. So I think there's like all these different ways that you can do it. And then the other thing for me is I have sons who play 1,000,000 hours of sports a week. And so one of my sons was in this competitive baseball league and like 2 nights a week, we were driving, 30 minutes away to take him to his practice. And then a lot of parents would like sit around and scroll on their phones or make their Costco run or chat with each other. I sat there with my laptop and I was like the antisocial one who was like, I'm writing a book. Like I need to keep doing this. So I think I was also like just kind of finding the time and making myself look forward to the time that I was putting aside for this. Like you're going to go to the baseball thing and you're going to have a fizzy water or whatever, and you're just going to write for a couple. I would get excited about it. So I would say find something that you can look forward to doing. Make it like I showed up and I'm feeling good, and congratulate yourself and feel proud of any progress that you can make. So I would never say it has to be any one way, but find the way that works for you and be nice to yourself as
a
you
lot of that
fumble
comes
through
through
it.
trial and error, right? I would
Mm-hmm.
imagine.
Yes.
And habit stacking. I think that's great. Doing it with something that you enjoy. Makes
I
a
like
whole
that
lot
you
of sense.
noted the habit stacking. Yes.
I did, yes, because I have done it. So certainly appreciate that. I'm thinking back to something as we're wrapping up that you started with at the beginning. And you said, you thought you had gone through the worst thing in your life with losing your mom, and then questioned your strength moving forward to the next hardest thing. And when you said that, I couldn't help but think about Kara Larson, who's the coach of the women's Duke basketball team. And she has this little pep talk that she gives her team that I have saved because I must watch it at least once a week. I think if it were the old cassette tape, it would have worn out by now. But she talks about saying, well, once I get through this, then it'll get easier. Once I get through this semester at school, it'll get easier. Once I get through this project at work, it'll get easier. Once I get through this. And she said, life doesn't get easier. What happens is you learn to handle hard better. And so when you were talking about that earlier, that's all I could think of is that experience with your mom was hard. The experience that you're living now with testing positive for that particular gene and the genetic testing and the things that you're doing to be a provider, you're just handling hard better. So certainly strong enough, and certainly living up to the title of the book, which is Living Proof.
Oh,
So
thank you so much for sharing that, Jen. That That means a lot to me, and I think I had never really thought of it in that perspective, from that perspective before, so I really do appreciate that. I really appreciate you sharing that with me.
I'll send you the clip when we're done
Thank you.
because it's amazing. She talks about, people just sitting around waiting for the easy bus, and that never really happens. But
Mhm.
if you want to do better, you just learn to handle hard better. And at the same time, it also doesn't make us rush through life. Like, okay, once I get this done, because there's always going to be something else, whether it's a work stress or, one of your sons, a baseball tournament that goes longer and then gets rained out. And there's always going
Mhm.
to be something. And it's just learning, just like you figured out your writing discipline that you do
Mhm.
best in the morning or where
Yep.
you have pockets of time. I would say the same thing. That sense of agency that you have is so valuable as an example to people reading this book.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, I would spend more time talking to you, Tiffany, but you're busy, very important. So this
So
is
are you, Jen.
some days. Stories end, final five questions, right? So you mentioned in the book that you can't imagine not living near water. If you had to choose to not live near water, would it be mountains or a big city?
Well, that is such a good question. I'm gonna go with mountains because I think that's where my husband would be happiest.
Yeah. Happy husband. Yeah, absolutely. And I also think maybe a throwback to Charlottesville and that time there.
Mhm.
Of the pop culture references, which there are a ton in this book, and since we're roughly of the same generation, it was quite fun to see. We talked about movies and TV shows and music. What is one TV show or movie that you can watch over and over and over again?
The Breakfast Club, Pretty Woman, Dirty Dancing,
Exactly.
Titanic.
Titanic. Yeah, that's amazing. There's something that I read recently that when we go through tough times and you find people that are kind of watching stuff that they've seen over and over again, there's that sense of comfort. You know what the outcome of the story is going to be. You know all the lines. You can recite them by heart.
Mhm.
You talk a little bit about one of my favorite lines in the book is about your mom and whether or not her sickness would eclipse your memories of her that were good. Will you share one of your favorite memories of her?
Well, there's so
I mean, there's
many.
so many to choose from, I know.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is a favorite memory, but it's one that I've been thinking about a lot. And we lived on this street called Rosewood in Lakewood, and there's a park at the top of the street. And we used to go to this park all the time. Like all the neighborhood kids would go there. And I have this memory of these kids littering at the park. And my mom being like, "You need to pick that up." And I was mortified that she called these kids out. But I feel like it was so emblematic of like the type of mom that was that she just like expected you to like do the right thing. And she was always sort of on you to like make good choice and like trusted that her kids were out in the community making these good choices and being good people. And it's just this weird little throwaway thing, one of 1,000 days of these days where it's like, I remember like, I can picture like the way her finger was in the air and the way that
A
like
little
the
wag.
sun was
Yeah.
on her. She was also, I just have to throw in one more. She
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
so good at, finding the free things that you could do in Northeast Ohio. So there was this like water park called Dover Lake Water Park, and it was like these water slides that were in the Cuyahoga Valley. They don't exist. The park is closed at this point. But we would go, like she would hear on the radio that there was like a day that was open to the public, and you better believe that we were there on the free day that the water slide park was open, or the free day that the zoo was open, or that she would make an activity out of like going to the grocery store on free sample day. And like that would be our lunch. And she just did this like really, like we did not have a lot of money growing up, but she never made it feel like we didn't have a lot of money. It was more like she was really fun and creative in figuring out like how we would have these good, like fun experiences, in this way that was always like this big adventure. And so she was really good at that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I can see where you get your creativity from, for sure.
Thanks.
No, she sounds like an amazing person, and I have to believe that you mentioned her wanting to see her kids doing good in the world. I would say she can check that box because yes, you all are.
Thank
What is a
you.
book you think everybody should read and why?
Well, this is a
Besides living
really good
proof how love
question.
defied genetic legacy.
This is a really good question. I bought for my son, Ben is now recently 17. I bought the James Clear book, the Atomic Habits book for him. And I feel like from a nonfiction perspective, I just really love this idea of trying to improve yourself 1% every day, just sort of building these small habits. And I think that's where, 300 words a day or, just continuing to try to be 1% better. So that is a nonfiction book that I would recommend to anybody. And it's hard for me to recommend a work of fiction because tastes are so subjective,
Right.
but I'll stick with Atomic Habits for this purposes of this call.
No, it's a fantastic book and a huge fan of the book and atomic is and atoms and how small they are. And so there are these little micro changes that if you're consistent show a huge amount of growth. So huge fan of the book. And then the last question, what song would always be on a road trip playlist?
Definitely Broken Horses by Brandy Carlisle.
Yeah. I mean, talk about singer, storyteller extraordinaire. For sure.
Yes.
Huge thank you to everybody listening, and especially huge thank you to Tiffany for being brave and sharing this story, living proof how love defied genetic testing with us. Being so vulnerable has to be difficult. And at the same time, I hope you realize how many readers will resonate with your story for so many reasons. This is you putting good and hope out into the world, letting hope ring louder than fear, which you say in your book, and letting someone or many someones know they are not alone. To know who else is visiting, go to storiedaccount.com. This is Storied Account with Jen Jumba.